Thanks, Greg. Thanks to MIF. I'm going to shun my duties as CEO for the moment, and we're going into lunch. So I'm just going to try and illustrate, I think, what Greg is talking about in terms of creating value in this market cycle in our business. One is by size and one is by grade. And I think if I went back, we're like Chicana, we're working on two projects focused. We have a portfolio, but I believe in focus for value creation. Bonita is an example of size. Size matters in exploration. If you're looking for a big copper deposit, you need a big copper system. And so here's an example in 2014, private VR goes in, and this color anomaly is about 7 by 7 kilometers. It's iron carbonates and iron oxides. We're deep in this igneous porphyry system. The yellow squares are these historic artisanal copper, gold, and iron workings. The red dots are these unusual, interesting iron oxide, copper, gold breccia occurrences at surface. And what's the opportunity for VR was to be able to go in when the business was quiet and stake not an anomaly or not a bullseye, but to stake a collection of showings like a district. And to understand that as interesting as those workings are, what's more interesting is that they're unified by really a single large-scale hydrothermal magmatic system, and that's an example to Greg's point about scale and about elephants. Another way you can see that footprint, so we've been exploring this for about 4 years, is just to look at a high-resolution mag survey. 100-meter line spacing, very low helicopter elevation. You can see in the top right that the hot colors, the pinks, you've got unaltered magnetic diorite. You can see in the bottom left, you've got this magnetic grain from Triassic volcanics and tertiary basalts and so on. You can see in the middle, you're basically washing out all of the grain and color in this mag, and it's telling you that these hydrothermal fluids have basically destroyed all of the magnetite in this igneous system. And that correlation with the color anomalies that you can see in alteration minerals in the showings is pretty much one-to-one. It's giving you more confidence that these showings are part of a very large footprint system. And during that work, we found out that Bonita, somewhat surprisingly, is exactly the same age as Yarrington. It's 165 million years old. It's in the early Jurassic. And the copper people in the crowd here know that Yarrington, with Anaconda in the early 50s, produced 4 major discoveries, 500 million tons to 2 billion tons, typically around 0.3 or 0.4. The copper endowment of that early Jurassic copper system is large. And Anaconda did what any mining company would do. They mined Yarrington first because it came to surface. The other deposits are actually larger, but they're also deeper, and so they have sat in the ground since Anaconda discovered them. With the realization that Bonita was part of this early Jurassic porphyry system akin to Yarrington, we took that outline of the hydrothermal footprint at Bonita, and we superimposed it on the Yarrington camp. And there's a really eerie similarity between the distribution, the footprint, if you will, of the copper deposits at Yarrington and the copper, gold, iron workings at Bonita. And it shows you, as we heard from Chicana, that these systems generally do occur in clusters. And our original version of this map actually was for the Highland Valley camp up in Kamloops, where you see the opportunity within these systems to get these clusters of these porphyry systems. So that is why the opportunity at VR from an investment point of view and for myself as a geologist is so unusual, was to be able to go in and acquire that footprint as opposed to have some fractionated ownership of one or part of one of the showings. Another way to look at the footprint of Bonita is to look at these sophisticated high-resolution resistivity surveys that you can do now. You couldn't do these 20 years ago. And this is a 200 ohm meter map, and there's lots of albite and there's lots of silica around, so that outline is similar to that color anomaly that you can see on the satellite, the magnetite destruction that you can see in the mag survey. What you can also see, though, are these two white circles, and you're looking at an oblique view of a block model. It's about 6 kilometers across. And so that shaded wall is, if you can imagine, the wall of a 2-kilometer pipe that is going through this resistivity model. And this is a 50 ohm meter conductor. And you can see these historic copper and gold workings are around the rim of that pipe. That's a cross-section through the block model. They do the data inversions, and they change the color scheme to what's more normal, so your conductor becomes these hot pinks. And in terms of scale and looking for elephants and things that would make a difference, it's working at two levels of bonito. One is simply the size of the system, and then two, to appreciate that that pipe is about 1,000 meters in diameter. It's at least 1,000 meters vertical, and like we heard with Chicana, what makes these interesting is they're not like Bingham Canyon and Escondido that go out into these huge argillic propylitic systems aerially. These breccia systems are more vertically attenuated. So the real upside is to understand if you could have copper driving that conductivity over 1,000 vertical meters, as opposed to Yarrington is about 80 meters thick. And that's really the opportunity of these types of systems, is to get vertically attenuated. Last year we were drilling in the alteration ring in these copper gold systems, and this summer, starting last week, we've simply moved into the center of these conductivity pipes, which we think are driving all of the alteration. And again, as we heard earlier, the thing to do is to test both the center but also the margins and try and understand where potentially is the copper in that conductivity. We're kind of day one of the story that you heard of from Chicana in terms of just actually coming onto these breccia pipes, understanding if they could be copper bearing. So that's the drill. It started last week. You're drilling steeply down the plunge of one of these pipes, and if you go 5 kilometers away over the other side of that hill, that looks like where you have this second breccia pipe system that is piercing this resistivity model. So the plan is to do 2 or 3 holes across these pipes. Should take a couple of months. Take a couple of months to get the assays back, and we would report on the program at the end of the summer. This is, I think, the best visual also for trying to understand what you can do when you're going into an old district with new ideas, and to understand that there are artisanal workings in this resistant ridge, lots of specularite breccia, lots of albite-altered latite dikes. They contain copper and gold. And to realize that really that conductivity pipe in that covered area is probably what's driving all of this copper-gold mineralization along the margin. That's about 2 kilometers if you're to walk on that ridge. This is about 1 kilometer in diameter. And, you know, if Anaconda walked over this in 1950, we didn't care about iron oxide breccias at that time. We didn't know about Olympic Dam. We didn't know about Carapatina. And now we understand that these iron oxide breccias in this ring are actually a vector into a pipe, which could be iron oxide breccia, and that makes it more interesting than it was, say, in 1950. So 4 years in that, I'm not going to spend a lot of time, just to emphasize this program this summer is basically the follow-up to our drilling last fall. The drilling last fall gave us confidence that Bonita actually is a deeply rooted porphyry magmatic hydrothermal system. And it got us into 1,000 feet of continuously phyllic and sodic alteration, copper-gold geochem anomalies. And really what we're doing really is just coming off the ridge and getting into this covered area to see what this Z10 conductor is. And the excitement for this from a scale point of view is just simply the volume of that pipe. And to understand that if you're on that ridge, you can see what this pipe could be. It could be that iron oxide copper gold breccia, which is the kind of stuff that hosts things like Olympic Dam and Carapatina, and you simply go from lower temperature on the outside to more higher temperature, more intense hydrothermal activity in the pipe. And when you do that, you take the chlorite and the silica and the sericite out of that rock, and you put in copper in the form of chalcopyrite or bornite. So that's one of the things that conductor pipe could be, is that rock, higher temperature with copper. It could also be a more standard looking, what I think most geos in the room would say is a porphyry style vein hydrothermal breccia pipe. And again, you simply bump up the temperature from phyllic alteration and quartz and chloride and start to put copper in with the silica in those veins. And if you can do that over the volume of that pipe in relation to that resistivity ring, That's an elephant, Greg, and that's the scale that we want to be looking for. The relevance of that, again, is, I think for me, is to remind the copper world that Bonita and Yarrington here, this is a paleotectonic reconstruction of North America at 150 million years ago. This is what North America looked like before we started piling up things like Stikine and Newmont Lake into the western margin. That's why Vancouver is out in the ocean here. We know about the Chile-Peru stuff. We sometimes forget the scale of the continental scale of this early Jurassic belt of porphyries that most people know about. What's important about Bonita is that Bonita on the alkaline side with these iron oxide breccias is more like Galore Creek, Mount Milligan and Morrison because they contain gold. They're slightly hotter. They're not calc-alkaline. They're not like Escondida. And the importance for Yarrington is to understand that if those 16 to 25 billion pounds of copper in those deposits had half a gram of gold, Anaconda probably would have taken those out of the ground 50 years ago. Gold makes a big difference in these porphyry systems, and for us to understand that Bonita is part of that belt, understand that it's more like Galore Creek probably than any of them, and Galore Creek goes back to the early 50s with Kennecott. If that deposit was sitting anywhere near the Trans-Canada, it would have been mined 70 years ago as one of the best copper-gold porphyry systems in North America. I just want to make a quick comment on, I was lucky enough to be part of two big discoveries in the Athabasca Basin, and to remind myself what the learning curve is and why we're spending money in this cycle looking for these elephants. People come up to me and say, oh, Mike, when Rio Tinto came in and into the Hathor competition, it was all over because they're a big company and they can write a big check. But you need to remember that when that check was written for $650 million, uranium had gone from $140 to $70. Rio Tinto had just taken their first $18 billion write-down on Alcan, and Fukushima had basically wiped out 35 to 80% of our entire industry. And that was not an easy check for Rio Tinto to write. The reason they did is because it was a world-class discovery in a world-class district, and if you're the CEO of a mining company, you just don't see that every day. And in my view, this Bonita system can remind copper companies around the world that you can still go into this belt and make big discoveries. And these are the kinds of discoveries like Hathor that operate what I call outside of the macroeconomics. And that's what we think Bonita has the potential to do, and that's why we're drilling. Just very quickly, I'm over here is just to talk about the other elephant in our business, and that is grade. There's two ways you make money in this business. One is size and one is grade. This other project that we've been working on, here's Bonita. Junction is about 75 kilometers to the north. There are these chalcopyrite bornite-bearing quartz veins and pegmatite that are at surface. They carry anywhere from 1 to 40% copper and 10 to 500 grams silver in a very unusual high-temperature mesothermal vein assemblage of things like bornite and chalcopyrite, oxidized to things like covellite and chalcocite. And they're carrying a silver mineral in the bornite crystallization. And so you can see this stuff on the ground, and you can walk 4.7 kilometers away and see the same style of mineralization and see basically the same copper-silver geochemistry. Thanks to a lot of hard work by Scott Birdall, who's here for about a year, we acquired essentially this. And Junction has turned out to be about 6,000 meters of very consistent vein and pegmatites coming to surface with some very unusual copper. The reason that you get these grades on these slides and you don't see this at Bonita is because this is higher temperature, and bornite, covellite, and tenorite give you those types of grades. What we really didn't expect is that a lot of that black oxidized copper is carrying silver. I don't know the mineralogy in the silver. We know that it's simply intimately related with the bornite. This is a low sulfidation system. For myself, what makes those numbers important is that if you look at the copper-silver correlation at Junction over 6,000 meters, you can see that it's basically 1-to-1. It doesn't matter if you're sampling a rock with 1% copper or 20%. The silver correlates. telling you that wherever you sample that rock, even if it's been supergene altered, the copper, the silver is not moving around. It's telling you that the oxidation is local, and it's really telling you that that system is robust because it's not changing. That copper-silver ratio is not changing. So this is about grade, and this is simply about understanding where in those 24 surface occurrences you have a chance of getting some down-dip continuation of some very unusual copper-silver mineralization. So, Greg, this is your elephant for the kind of value that those rocks can produce when they're at surface. You don't need a kilometer in diameter pipe to get excited about that vein pegmatite. You need basically a meter with some alteration on the footwall. If you think that, doing an airborne mag survey, which we've just completed, gives you a hint of some continuity down dip from those veins or from those. That's what VR is working on right now. Bonita's in the front end, Junction is in the back end. You do need to look for elephants in this cycle, and VR is doing that in Nevada one by scale and one by grade. So thanks very much, Greg.